Chapter 11. Friday morning. Surprisingly, the next morning Doreen woke up feeling rested. She rolled over and stared at the massive bed frame beside her. She wanted to laugh out loud, but at the same time, she was also sad because she was letting go of part of her heritage. She knew it was important in order to make her future easier, but something was just so very comforting about the thought of all the nights her grandmother had slept in that bed. Not to mention all the nights her great and great-great-grandmothers had slept in the same bed. Doreen's past was part of that piece of furniture, and she didn't want to minimize the effect selling it had on her. She closed her eyes and sent out a moment of thanks to the women who had gone before her. They were strong, they had been through so much, and yet they had survived. Not only survived, they had thrived. Doreen wanted to do the same. She wanted to do well for herself. She knew the challenges she faced were different from what the women in her family before her had faced, but that didn't make it any less important that Doreen also do her best at every turn. She got up slowly to find Muggs had approved of their new mattress on the floor situation. He slept at her feet. Goliath lay on the pillow beside her head. Thaddeus had retained his spot atop the closest newel post on the four-poster bed. She'd forgotten to put newspaper under him, so she found one bird dropping. She walked into the bathroom, grabbed some toilet paper, cleaned it up, and used a spray bottle she kept close by to wipe up the last little bit. With that done, she dressed. Casting another look at the antique bedroom set, she meandered downstairs, looking at the bright early morning sunshine outside. One thing about being here in Kelowna, she said to herself, the weather is divine. Unlike Vancouver, as a coastal city which had constant rain. While living there with her soon-to-be ex-husband, Doreen had had lots of places outside where she could walk under cover. Yet it wasn't the same as seeing and feeling the sunshine. Kelowna did get winter here, but it was mild. At least she hoped it was. She put on coffee and looked out at the yard, remembering last night's events, the intruder and the items he'd stolen from her. The outrage. She walked from the back door to the front door, releasing the alarms at each entryway. That done, she poured herself a cup of coffee. With the animals in tow, she stepped onto the rear veranda and down the few steps to walk along the backyard, just wearing a pair of pink flip-flops on her feet as she meandered through the garden. It was a lovely, sunny morning. The backyard looked so much bigger with the rear fence down, but she still had a lot of work to do on the garden beds. And yet, she didn't want to just dive in. She needed to make a plan and to see what all was here first. By now she should know, but so much of it was overgrown. And she'd been a little busy. And since today was Friday, that meant she needed to return to Mac's mother's house and do some more gardening there, which also meant more money tomorrow. She grinned at that. It hadn't been quite a week since she'd last been there, but there was no end of work to do on Millicent's lawn. Doreen chuckled. Hey, thanks, Mac. You're doing a good job keeping me in food, she said out loud. She also needed to pack up more of those clothes she'd set aside to take to Wendy's. Not to mention all the Goodwill boxes. She'd left it all sitting around the house to move out to her car, but she had yet to do so. And that was foolish. It was a relatively easy job, and it would relieve some of the household clutter. That would certainly make it easier when the men came to pack up the furniture. With that thought uppermost in her mind, she checked her watch and found she had overslept. She went back inside, poured herself a second cup, then moved all the bags for Wendy's store out to her car. She had hoped to take a load to Goodwill at the same time, but it didn't look like that was possible. She'd have to make a second trip. She could do Wendy's first, as Wendy opened early. With Muggs at her side, locking the other two animals in the house, she soon drove to Wendy's store. The proprietor of the consignment store, second time round, was just unlocking the door when Doreen arrived. Aren't you out bright and early? Wendy said with a smile. She motioned at the bags. Are those for me? They are, if you think you can sell them, Doreen said hopefully. Come on in. Let's take the bags right to the back room and we'll start sorting. Sounds good. Muggs stayed close on her heels as Doreen grabbed the bags one at a time, parking them on the sidewalk. By the time she had all the bags out, Wendy had come back out for 2 more, carrying them to the back room. Inside the store, she turned on the lights and escorted Doreen to the rear section where she had large tables set up. Do you want to wait or check in with me later? She asked. I do have to open the store before I begin. I can give you a call later, and you can come back and pick up what I don't think I can sell. Doreen hesitated. If you don't mind, I will come back when you give me a call. I have a busy morning planned. No problem. Wendy waved her off. I might not get through it all today though. You brought me a lot. Doreen chuckled. And there's still more to come. Wendy's eyebrows popped up. Wow. Who knew Nan had so many clothes? Right. And some of these are pretty stylish. I've kept quite a few for myself. Wendy chuckled. Why not? All the styles and fashion way back when are coming around. There's really nothing new in life. It's just patterns and cycles. I agree. Doreen gave a wave and walked with Muggs out to her car. Back home, not giving herself a chance to slow down, she loaded up all the stuff for Goodwill and drove in the opposite direction. They were also just opening, but they had a drive-through section, and employees unloaded the stuff from her car. Doreen liked that system. When the car was empty, she gave a bright, cheerful toot of the car horn and pulled away. Muggs, now it's time for breakfast. He woofed beside her. He hadn't eaten either. Back home, she fed the animals, then studied the stove and wondered if she dared. She was a little lacking in the ingredients she needed. Only eggs and cheese remained in her fridge, but it would be lovely to have an omelet again. Very carefully, using the stove on a low heat setting, she proceeded to do the same thing she'd done twice before. And lo and behold, she ended up with a beautiful-looking cheese omelet. She sat down and chuckled. Then she took a picture of it, cut it in half, arranged the pieces a little more picturesquely on the plate, and took a second picture. She sent it to Mac. He should be happy to know she did it on her own. While she ate her omelet, she thought about everything else she had to do that day. Finishing up her breakfast, Doreen got a call from the antiques appraiser. The men will be there at noon on Monday, Scott Rawson announced. Her heart sank. Okay. She tried not to let anything show in her voice. I was hoping you'd come today. I'm nervous about having all these pieces here. There's been several break-ins already. Oh dear. I'm so sorry to hear that. I'm coming as soon as I possibly can. Maybe ask the police for some assistance, he said. I'll be there Monday. She smiled as the call ended, placed the phone beside her, and it rang yet again. She recognized Mac's number. She hated to admit it, but something lightened inside her. Good morning, Mac, she said cheerfully. Well, you're awfully happy for a Friday morning, he said. Is it because you slept well? Sure, she said. Why not? And I made my first omelet, all on my own. I saw the photo you sent. Good for you. And the antiques appraiser just called and said the guys are coming Monday at noon to pack up. Not until Monday then, he said. That's too bad. I was hoping for your sake it would be today or tomorrow. Me too, she said. But it is what it is. Please tell me that you haven't let that thief out of jail again. No, he shouldn't be getting out anytime soon. But I have yet to talk to the judge. Do you have to talk to the judge? No, that was just a phrase. I have to talk to the prosecutors. They will ask the judge to make sure McLeod doesn't get bail. Well, he's obviously not had a change of ways, she said. And he remains a danger to society still. Sure enough, Mac said. We have tagged and photographed the pieces he stole from you, but we'll have to keep them for a while yet. I'll let you know when you can get them back. Okay, she said. As much as I'd like those pieces sold and moved into somebody else's hands for safekeeping, at least if they're in your hands, if you break them, you get to replace them. Ouch, he said with a laugh. After a moment's hesitation, he asked, "What are you up to today?" "I just made 2 trips, one to the consignment store and one to Goodwill. I'll probably go back upstairs and do some more cleaning out of my bedroom before the movers arrive. But it's also Friday, so I'll work on your mom's garden for a couple hours." "Right," he said. "I'll stop by tomorrow with some cash for you." "Good," she said. "Then I can buy more omelet ingredients." That brought a startled chuckle from him. "So what do you want to learn to make next?" She hesitated. "What do you mean?" "What else do you like to eat?" he asked. "Well, what I used to like to eat, and what I like to eat now, are very different things," she said with a chuckle. "But the fact of the matter is, it doesn't really matter what I used to like, because I can't afford it." "True enough," he said. "So, along with your change in budget, you've had a change in taste. What do you like now?" "I used to love pasta," she said. "I had it with scampi and all kinds of mussels and fresh seafood." She warmed to the subject. "But I was wondering if pasta itself, without all the expensive toppings, would be cheap and possible to cook." "Absolutely," he said. "Pasta is very easy to cook." She brightened. "Are you serious? Or are you teasing me again?" "Look it up on YouTube," he urged. "It's very easy. Just boiling water, a little bit of salt, a little bit of oil, pop in the pasta and you've got plain cooked noodles. It's what you do with those noodles afterward that makes a difference." Images of all the lovely pasta dishes she used to eat filled her mind. "I wasn't allowed to eat very much," she said in a low tone. "My husband used to tell me how it would make me fat, so he would cut my portions." "Your husband was an asshole," Max said. "Remember? We've already determined that." "True enough," she said. "So what do you put on the pasta?" "If you're broke," he said, "you put butter on it. If you can afford a little more, you put cheese with it. If you can afford even more, you can do a spaghetti sauce. You can also add steamed vegetables. You can do chicken and a white sauce. That's a chicken Alfredo. You can do amazing things with different ingredients. You know what? I think that's a really good place to start." He sounded like he was warming up to the subject. She wasn't sure if she should ask or not, and then she decided there was really no point in not asking. She knew that he didn't mind helping her, because he'd taught her how to make the omelet. "So does that mean you're up for teaching me how to make some pasta dishes?" she asked. When she heard the hesitation on the other end of the phone, she tried to backtrack. "But that's asking too much. Just forget it." "Not only will I remember that you asked," he said, "but I was figuring out where to start." "You said with a pot of water, salt, oil, and pasta," she said dryly. "And I'm broke. So if we have just butter with it, that sounds pretty good to me." "Maybe," he said. "But I'm not that broke. Although I like plain buttered noodles, I can also make sauces." "Can you?" she asked eagerly. "Like a tomato sauce with ground beef?" "Only if it comes with mushrooms, green peppers, and red wine." "That sounds divine," she said excitedly. "After you bring by my gardening payment, I have to go out shopping tomorrow. Maybe I can pick up a few of those things." But she could hear the doubt in her own voice. "I honestly don't know what to buy, how much to buy, or how expensive everything will be." "We'll do the same as last time," he said. "I'll pick up the items and come to your house and we'll cook." "Okay," she said slowly. "Repeating it on Sunday too." "I'm not sure it'll work that way with the spaghetti sauce," he said. "Let me think about it. And stay out of trouble today, will you?" "Of course I will." "Easy peasy," she said. She hung up the phone, made a cup of tea, and said to her animal family, "I think we should get the gardening done while we can." She poured her tea into a travel mug. With all the animals, she set the alarms and walked to Mac's mom's place. There Doreen set to work, weeding and pruning, like she'd done last week. Millicent's yard really did need more than 2 hours of Doreen's time a week, but as long as she could do that much, it would keep it all mostly under control. She had just begun work when Mac's mom appeared on the back steps and called out to her. Doreen lifted her hand. "Good morning." All her animals took off to greet Millicent too. "You're here early," Millicent said, chuckling as she scratched Muggs's ears. Then she stroked Goliath's back as he rubbed against her. Thaddeus squawked and hopped up to the top of the porch railing, looking for attention too. "I figured, with all the excitement this week, you might not come today." "Oh, I'm here," Doreen said with a smile, resting on her heels. "How are you?" "I'm fine," the old woman said. "And you must be doing much better too. Everybody is just buzzing with the news about little Paul. Did you know him?" "I didn't know the little boy," she said, grinning as Thaddeus nudged her hand, "but the handyman was a family guy. We all knew him." "Well," Doreen said, "somebody asked me to look into another cold case, but I don't have any feelers." She stared at Millicent, guessing this woman was probably in her 80s, would have been in her 50s back when Johnny disappeared. "Do you remember when a Johnny Jordan went missing?" She walked toward the woman on the porch. "Johnny Jordan." Millicent sat down on her rocking chair. "I don't think I remember that case. Can you tell me any more details about it? Jog this old memory of mine?" "He was sitting in the backyard of his brother George's place," she said, stopping short of the porch steps. "Then they never saw him again. Nobody knows what happened." Doreen shared a few of the details about George and Penny. "Oh, poor Penny," Millicent murmured. "I remember something about that now. Everybody thought Johnny had just run away. Then 2 of his friends were killed soon afterward. For a while rumors were flying that maybe he'd killed them and taken off." "Wait, what?" Doreen asked. "Why would anybody think Johnny had killed his 2 friends? I thought they died in a car accident not too long after Johnny's disappearance." Millicent nodded, pointing her finger at Doreen. "They did, but they died in his car. According to the father of one of the young men who died," she said, "his son had bought the car off Johnny." "Oh, I don't think so," Millicent said, shaking her head rapidly. No. That car was his baby." "So you do remember him?" Doreen asked to be certain. "I knew George," she said. "If you had told me that Johnny was George's brother who had gone missing, I would have remembered. George used to talk all the time about how he and his kid brother were working on that car. But maybe George cared more about the car than his baby brother did." Millicent gave Doreen an assessing look. "That's possible too. Often we do things, thinking the other person we're doing them with or for is enjoying it as much as we are. But maybe Johnny didn't." "What I don't understand," Doreen said, "is if Johnny accidentally hit his friends running them off the road, why would he take off? It was an accident. Nobody was at fault, as far as I know." "No, and I don't think the police found any evidence of that either," Millicent said, "because the car went over one of the cliffs. The fire finished the vehicle afterward. They had a hard time identifying the bodies." Doreen straightened. "So how did they know it was Johnny's friends?" "I don't know," Millicent said, shaking her head, watching Thaddeus strut up and down the porch railing, flapping his wings to some unnamed rhythm. "But it was definitely a sad day in town here. We didn't have the same size population back then." She lowered her tone, as if nobody was allowed to know that tidbit. "With a lot less people living here, we knew each other better. And honestly, if they said it was those 2 boys, I trust it was those 2 boys." Doreen nodded, but in the back of her head, she wondered. She returned to a nearby garden bed, bent down, reached for more chickweed, pulling up several strands. Do you remember anything else from back then? Millicent pondered that question for a long moment. Doreen went back to weeding, staying close to the porch so they could still talk. You know, I don't think so, Millicent said. I know George was terribly devastated. And he passed away last year, Doreen said, so he never did get answers to the mystery. No, and that's very sad too. I just wonder if it had something to do with the families of those two boys. There had definitely been talk about those boys being involved in something they shouldn't have been. Although that's almost a normal state for young men. In what way? Doreen asked. I can't quite remember. I know there were definitely some ill feelings among the parents, as if blaming each other's child for having led their son down the wrong road. Doreen snorted. Now that sounds familiar too. Millicent gave her a wise look. Nothing so perfect as your own child, she said with a smile. Just ask me. At that, Doreen laughed. Mac is a lot of things, she said, still chuckling, but perfect he is not. Of course he is, Millicent said with a teasing smile. He's my son. Therefore he's perfect. Although, she added, he was too young to have worked the original missing persons case. But then he never wanted to talk to me about his investigations, even when I expressed an interest in them. Said the details would give me nightmares. Plus he thought what I knew was based purely on gossip. Well, that explains why he treats me the way he does with his cold cases. But you know what? Sometimes a kernel of truth can be found in gossip. So both sets of parents would have thought their children were perfect too, right? Yes, Millicent said. They would have blamed the other child. In this case, there were 3 boys who hung out together. 1 disappeared and 2 were killed. Yes. So interesting circumstances, but nobody ever heard from Johnny again. At least I'm not tripping over any bodies this time, Doreen said with a chuckle. Ah, that's because you've been looking in the wrong place. Those 3 were forever hanging out at the old park. What old park? And does Mac know about it? She pulled out her phone and quickly asked him in reference to Johnny's disappearance. The response came back almost immediate, in the affirmative. Sighing, she put the phone back in her pocket and refocused on the conversation. Of course he does. I'm talking about the one by the downtown center. It was pretty rough down there. A lot of junkies hung out in that park. If Johnny was killed anywhere, I'd have said that was the most likely spot, Millicent said. There used to be lots of ravines on that edge of town. I always wondered if Johnny didn't go down there, and somebody maybe pulled the bank over on top of him. Doreen winced at that. That doesn't sound good. By the way, she said, straightening up, was it only the 3 boys who hung out together? Those 3 boys were really tight. There was another guy, and I think a couple girls. That one girlfriend was a little dodgy. If you're talking about Susan, she died a year ago from breast cancer, Doreen said. So it'll be hard to get answers from her. Oh, not her. Another girl hung around with them a lot. Although she went from one boy to the next. It seemed like she was just moving through the 4 of them. Most likely all the relationships shifted constantly. Males and females alike, particularly at that age, Doreen said. Do you know who that 4th boy was? I don't remember. I mean, after all, when 1 goes missing and 2 die, there's not really a gang left. So the 4th guy must have hung out with a new group. Millicent spoke once again in that wise tone. True enough, Doreen said. Do you remember what his name was, though? Alan, she said suddenly. I think. Ask Penny. She'll know. I can do that, Doreen said. I wonder what happened to him. If he were smart, he moved away. It seemed like that whole gang had a black mark against them, she said. And that would be a tough way to live in this town. But it wasn't really a black mark, right? They weren't charged with anything serious, were they? No idea, Millicent said. Maybe ask Mac. He might know. But as you also know, she said gently, your son won't tell me much. Not in so many words, but he could certainly let you know little bits and pieces. And if those boys were charged with anything, that's public record. Alan was his first name. I can't remember his last name. I want to say Hornby, but my old memory box isn't quite what it was. Doreen chuckled. I think your memory is just fine. She kept working and talking to Millicent, losing track of time. Finally, she sat back on her heels once more and said, I think I'm done for this week. Good, Millicent said, standing up, giving each of the animals a goodbye cuddle. Then I'm going in and taking a nap. That's a good idea, Doreen said. And if you don't mind, I'm heading home. Perfect. It's nice to see you like this. Then she stopped. Oh my, she said. I meant to give you some zucchini bread. Hang on. She went inside and came back a moment later with what looked like one half of a loaf of zucchini bread, sliced and wrapped up. She handed it to Doreen, who met her on the porch, and said, Thank you so much for coming, dear. With a finger wave, Doreen and the animals started back. As soon as she was out of sight, she had her phone out, looking up Alan Hornby. It turned out the Hornby family used to live in the same cul-de-sac where Penny lived. Doreen frowned and said aloud, How about we walk the long way around, guys? And with that, she turned in the direction of Penny's house, fully intending to see where the Hornby house was. Maybe Penny had a few more answers to help tie up some of this mystery, because, if 4 men were originally involved, Doreen needed to hear about the last guy still living. To learn that 2 girls and another guy were hanging around the 3 boys, she had a lot more questions she needed to ask. And one of the biggest was, who identified the 2 boys who died in the vehicle?